She's known as the mother of KU women's athletics. In her long and distinguished career, Marlene Mawson pioneered opportunities for women in a wide variety of intercollegiate sports. And today we get to speak with Marlene about her pioneering work and about her new book. Welcome to Free History. I'm your host, Will Hickox. In response to growing interest in the histories of issues like equality and civil rights that are filling headlines today, several cultural institutions in Kansas have partnered to present a series of interviews with historians and other experts touching on connections between historical events and human rights today. Free History is a collaboration between the Hall Center for the Humanities, Humanities Kansas, the Watkins Museum of History, Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area, and the University of Kansas Department of African and African American Studies. Today's event is also a partnership with the University Press of Kansas, and it's made possible by a National Endowment for the Humanities CARES Act grant. Today, I'm honored to speak with L. Marlene Mawson. As a young physical education teacher in the late 1960s, Marlene established a women's athletics program at the University of Kansas that is still going strong more than 50 years on. Now she's written a book, Mawson's Mission, Launching Women's Intercollegiate Athletics at the University of Kansas. Thanks for agreeing to speak with us, Marlene.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity.
Your book is very well documented and places your career in the context of changes and opportunities for women and girls. What were competitive sports like for women and girls in America up to the mid-20th century?
Well, there weren't very many sports at all before the turn of the 20th century. In fact, sport was a male domain and women were free to be spectators, but they didn't engage in sport much. But then came along the bicycle in the 1890s, and they wanted to be able to ride the bicycle, and it wasn't possible when they had to straddle the bicycle, and they had been used to being able to ride side saddle on a horse, but they couldn't do that on a bicycle. And so the skirts were split up the center of the front and the back, and seams sewed so that they could straddle a bicycle. And it gave them the freedom to start to play other sports that they hadn't been able to play before. And so right before the turn of the 20th century, in fact, in the 1890s, several new sports came along that were developed that women learned to play and really enjoyed playing. And so all during the 1920s, there was a control of how much competition women could really engage in collegiate sport. Now, this happened all through the 1920s and 30s and clear into the 40s until the United States got into World War II, and all the men began to be in the military, and the women were left home to fill in for all the jobs that men did. And that's when we knew Rosie the Riveter and the women like her. Now, women began to play on teams and they really enjoyed the competition, but they weren't curtailed by these educational groups that were saying, no, you can't play and you can't compete and so forth. They played the entire game and they really liked it, which persisted a little while afterwards. But then when the men got back, the men took over the spotlight and the women's teams didn't prevail very long. But during the 1950s and 60s then, and the end of the 40s, in colleges, the idea came that they needed to compete and have winners and losers and compete in the whole game. But some other things were happening. Now, in 1960, you know that we elected a new young president, JFK Kennedy, and he had as one of his goals to establish dominance in against Russia because we were in a Cold War. He wanted to win in the Olympics too. And the United States could not win in the Olympics against Russia because Russia got medals from both men and women competitors. But the United States might get medals from the men, but the women weren't really competitors because they had been discouraged from competing. So during the 1960s, the Division of Girls and Women in Sport and the Olympic Development Committee got together and they offered 5 national institutes for women's sports. And these Olympic institutes were to help women across the country learn how to coach sports. And I got to go to the 5th national championship then, a national institute then, because I was then in Kansas. I'd already been hired at KU in 1968, a year earlier. Now, those 5 institutes had a great bearing on the widespread interest in competitive sport for women, and it changed a lot of things beginning in 1968. It was announced that starting in 1969, there would be national championships for women in 5 sports. And when that was announced across the country in every institution of higher education, women were deciding whether or not they wanted to establish an athletic department for women. But it was physical education women making that decision. There weren't any women in athletics on any campus. It was all men for athletics. But women in physical education stepped up and said, we will have a team in these sports and we'll be ready to enter national championships and compete there. Now, at the University of Kansas, now they decided that they needed to have some young women come and do this, just like they knew that the young women had to be the ones that went to these institutes. And so they opened a position, in fact, 3 positions for young women to take positions in the physical education department at KU. One was to take over the intramural program, which had more than 1,000 KU women participating. And one was to establish a new athletics program. And the other was to teach and to assist when needed. Now, I happened to be teaching in Kansas City at Van Horn High School at the time. I'd been there for 6 years. I had been participating in sport myself because I was an athlete. I had played basketball in high school, and even though we only got to play on sports day teams once in a while, when I was in college, I played on regular teams when I started teaching because Kansas City had a USBBA volleyball team that played in an Oklahoma-Missouri conference, and I played on that team. I played for the Kansas City Dons in basketball in the Kansas City region, and I played, and I also officiated the Kansas City Field Hockey Club at Swope Park. I had directed girls' gym shows every spring at the school where I was. I was hired and I became a faculty member, full-time faculty member as an extra duty. Then I was assigned to start the women's athletics program. And I was very happy to do that because it was something I wanted to do when I was a college student, but it never happened. But I got to allow it to happen where I was then at KU.
You describe how, quote, I was on my own because there was no precedent for creating a women's athletics program with a meager budget, unquote. What sustained you in this difficult mission, and how did you achieve it together with the other staff and athletes?
Well, first of all, because I was assigned to do this, there was the support of funding, but the funding was $2,000 for 6 sports for the year. What it did, it paid for our travel to away games in those 6 sports. And it also paid for 1 set of uniforms, that is, shells with numbers on them and shorts. We didn't have enough money in the first year to buy the whole outfit. So in the second year, we got the jackets. And in the third year, we got the long pants to go with them. but still there was only one set of uniforms for all the team sports. So we had to make sure that we didn't schedule two of the team sports at the same time. I coached four of the six sports because I had a background in it and because we didn't have very many options, I should say. And then I coached field hockey and volleyball and basketball and softball. We had one of the four courts in the two gyms of Robinson that we could practice and play on 2 hours a day. And the only other court on campus was in Allen Fieldhouse, and Allen Fieldhouse was off limits to women. It was difficult, but it was possible. And so that's what made you just keep going, because you had young women who were talented, highly skilled, and they wanted to play, and whatever it took, they were ready to do it.
How did conditions change for women athletes in the 1970s?
Well, Title IX was a part of the Education Amendments Act of 1972. And so it wasn't until the summer of 1973 that anybody knew what was required in order to comply. Now, the reason why there was teeth in this law was because the Education Amendments Act was how national collegiate colleges and universities got federal funding. And if they did not comply to the Education Amendments Act, then they could not be funded. They could not receive funding. And so money was involved in this law, and it really made a difference. So by 1974, now this is a year after the compliance regulations have come out, then KU moved the women's athletics program from physical education to KU athletics. And for the first time, women were now in Allen Fieldhouse in 1974. This also made a difference because in summer of 1974, the Board of Regents in Kansas knew that they had to help out so that their institutions would not lose federal funds. And so they budgeted for KU was $48,000, and also for K-State for the other institutions, the other four state institutions, they got 10,000 less. Now, at the same time, the KU Student Senate matched the Board of Regents amount to put into women's athletics. And all of a sudden, women went from $9,000 to nearly 120. And so now they have a whole lot more money. But they are also in Allen Fieldhouse, and there are no facilities in Allen Fieldhouse for women. So they gave them the corner locker room that was the team dressing room for visitor teams. And so all the women were in, and all of the teams were in one locker room. There was no softball field. There wasn't any volleyball court. And they weren't about to put volleyball standards in the middle of a basketball floor called Naismith Court. And so there were a lot of problems still. But that's when KU athletics began to build on to Allen Fieldhouse and construct many other structures for athletics. And it has grown to be a completely different athletic complex by now.
In looking back on your long career in athletics, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm proud of what has developed since then. I went out to Rock Chalk Park when I came back to Kansas after I'd retired, and watched them build this new facility. And I was just overwhelmed. It was such a beautiful facility. And I thought at the time, who would have dreamed when I started working in athletics here at KU that this would ever have been possible? And as I look around at other things that have happened, women now have scholarships, athletic scholarships equal to men. They have more opportunities, frankly, in different sports. And it's really a vastly different opportunity, especially compared to when I went to college and also when I started the program here. And although there's still some room to expand and to make more equitable, it's almost there. It's 50 years later, but we've made a lot of progress.
Well, Marlene, this has been a powerful and even, I think, uplifting discussion. Thank you for giving us some of your time today to go over your career and your new book.
Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to explain a little bit of what's in my book. So thank you very much for inviting me to present this.
Yeah, and speaking of the book, I want to make sure I mention that there is an exciting offer from University Press of Kansas. Until December 16th, 2020, you can go to their website and get 30% off Mawson's Mission along with all their other books, as well as free shipping. Use the offer code MYBOOK. And thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.